turn that recording on now. And now that I've done that, I'm going to turn over and introduce our first speaker for this evening. Our first speaker is Liam Prince. Liam is a full-time zero waste and circular economy researcher and advocate specializing in organics, plastics, and reusable packaging. He co-founded The Rubbish Trip with his partner Hannah Blumhardt based on their experience of living without a rubbish bin since 2015 and have delivered hundreds of presentations on zero waste living across Aotearoa. Liam is also the chair of the Aotearoa Plastic Pollution Alliance, co-founder of Takeaway Throwaways, and is on the Zero Waste Network's research team. So Liam has been working quite extensively in studying the bioplant application, and that's what he's going to be speaking to specifically this evening. So over to you, Liam.
Kia ora, Val, and tēnā koutou katoa. Tahi, kei te mihi, ki te mana whenua, te rohe, Ngāti Kauwhata, tēnā koutou. Ko Liam tōku ingoa, he tangata tiriti au. I'm a zero waste and circular economy researcher, as Val mentioned, involved with a range of different organisations. I am based in Wellington, but all of my immediate family and many friends and family, and I myself lived in Manawatu and around Fielding. So this pyrolysis proposal, concerns me both on a personal and a professional level. But today, what I really want to talk to you about is how waste to energy technologies really are a backward step when it comes to reducing waste and combating climate change. So yes, I have been looking through the resource consent documents and looking at aspects of them. And one thing you'll notice is, first off, is that it's only about discharge to air. But really the impacts of this facility potentially go far beyond what comes out of the chimneys. I feel after reading a lot of these documents that there's a real lack of information about a lot of the byproducts, including the char, the liquid fuels, the wastewater, and the filters and scrubbers, issues around the safety of these products, where they will end up, how they will be disposed of, and what the off-site impacts might be once they leave the facility. I don't have time to go into these details, but I am happy to answer any questions or have a discussion in the chat later as well. But one of the biggest issues of this whole process being focused around a discharge to air only and being so narrowly focused on that is it doesn't allow us to consider whether this kind of technology fits into the bigger picture of combating climate change and drastically reducing our society's waste problem. And I think it's important to discuss these issues because Bioplant does use a lot of terms and talk about how clean and green their technology is. They talk about generating green renewable energy, biochar, biodiesel, and these sorts of things. And these are quite misleading and inaccurate. For example, how can they be producing biodiesel and renewable energy when plastics are some of the key inputs to the process? Plastics in no way can be considered renewable. They're made from non-renewable fossil oil. And it's also inaccurate and misleading for the company to say that their facility will save carbon emissions because, for one, in their carbon calculations that are in the resource consent, they do not include any of the emissions that come from the 14,000 litres a day of synthetic diesel that will be produced and eventually burned. And as plastics are one of the inputs, they will not be carbon neutral. And also because at this part of the table of carbon calculations, they assume that all of the municipal solid waste that they process would otherwise produce methane in landfill, but it's only the organic waste that would produce methane in landfill. All of the plastics and other synthetic materials do not. And also the landfill which this waste would otherwise go to, Bonnie Glen, has a methane gas capture system, which, they're not perfect, but it would reduce the methane emissions from landfill. So these calculations do contain a number of misleading inaccuracies that question whether this facility is actually contributing to climate change rather than helping to fight it. But in some ways, some of these details around these miscalculations are really only a very small part of the story. And again, just want to take a step back to consider the bigger picture here. So Bioplant talk a lot about New Zealand's landfill crisis and about how their technology is a solution to this. Now, I would be the first person to admit that landfills ultimately are terrible. They are a scourge on the whenua. They have no place in a zero waste and pollution-free future, but they aren't the problem in and of themselves. We need to see landfills as a symptom or the endpoint of a much bigger problem. And that problem is this idea of a linear economy, that we are extracting resources, making them into products, consuming and using those products before disposing of them as waste. Now, what waste to energy technologies do is they simply create a different way for us to deal with all the waste that comes out the end of the line. Can you please mute yourself, Trevor? So instead of burying these waste products in a hole in the ground, what we're doing with waste to energy is instead we just recover a little bit of energy from those products and materials, but we also destroy the physical resources in the process. And by either burying or burning those resources, rather than finding ways of cycling them back through the economy, we just continue to extract and produce and transport the Earth's resources in ever increasing quantities, and all of which have huge climate change and pollution implications. Like, in fact, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, who are one of the global organizations leading the advocacy for a circular economy, they've calculated 45% of global emissions come from the production and consumption of products. So in other words, almost half of the world's climate emissions are linked to the way that we extract, produce and consume the Earth's resources, and most of which gets wasted. And so what's worse is that waste to energy technologies create what is called a lock-in effect. So millions of dollars are invested and multi-decade contracts are signed for facilities like this that require waste to continually be generated. And so we also lock in the harmful effects of the linear economy. Now, these investments are a problem. This lock-in is a problem because it directly competes with zero waste activities like redesigning, banning and reducing wasteful products at source, developing reuse systems to replace single-use systems, and recycling and composting and recovering the rest. They aim to prevent waste from being produced in the first place that would otherwise be buried or burnt. Now, these are by no means fanciful ideas. You could check out the stories from Europe's Zero Waste Cities, zerowasteCities.eu. There's some great stories there. And also, I'm sure we'll hear from Rick later about some of the amazing work they do up in Raglan. But finally, I just wanted to point out that these technologies are really out of step with where we are heading as a society. The European Union is shifting away from waste to energy, and the reliance on waste to energy from countries like Denmark have seen them fail to achieve climate targets, and it sent their waste generation per capita through the roof. Last week, we saw a legally binding mandate for a legally binding plastic pollution treaty agreed to, and that will importantly address the life cycle impacts of plastic. And that could potentially mean New Zealand and the world has to drastically change the way we use and manage plastic, and that could make plastic pyrolysis completely redundant. Also last week, the IPCC released the latest report, which again provided a stark reminder of the seriousness of climate change, but also it came up with some quite critical points around the dangers of what they called maladaptation, which, basically false solutions that lock in the risks of climate change and make it more difficult and more expensive to change in the long run. And this is exactly what waste to energy technologies will do, when what we desperately need is to transform the way that we produce, consume and manage materials across the economy. So, we have a very small window of opportunity to create a world that is free from pollution and waste, and we can't afford to lose that opportunity with false solutions like this pyrolysis proposal. So that's all I have time for, but I do look forward to your questions and your feedback. But just a big thanks to all of you for being here, and also a big mihi to Fielding Against Incineration for hosting this event and enabling us to have these really important conversations. Tēnā koutou katoa.
Kia ora. Thank you very much, Liam. Yeah, really appreciate all of the points that you're bringing to light about the bioplant application, about some of the issues relating to the char, some of the issues relating to the climate emissions, and the issues related to the consents that have not been asked for by the regional council, but also the wider picture. And we're going to hear a bit more about that wider picture a bit later. But at this stage, I just want to remind everybody, please to mute yourself. We've had a couple of people come in just in the last couple of minutes, so welcome and thank you very much for being here. If you could please mute yourself. We do encourage people to put your introduce yourself over in the chat, and to pop any questions or comments into the chat over there. We will really try to get to all of the questions. So if you've got specific questions about the application, if you've got questions for any of our speakers, please feel free to pop them in the chat as we go along throughout the evening. So I want to turn over to our second speaker at this stage. Meriti Taipana of Tahuri Wakanui Ngāti Kauwhata. Meriti is speaking on behalf of Aorangi Marae and trustees and those Ngāti Kauwhata who oppose the establishment of a pyrolysis plant in the area. When Meriti isn't working hard to uphold the rangatiratanga of her people, she runs Tautoko Solutions and works as a trained counselor. So thank you very much, Meriti, for being here tonight. And we're going to turn over to you.
Better unmute myself. Tēnā koutou katoa, tēnā koe and kei te mihi kia koe Angela for calling this hui and for including us in on this hui. It just goes to show how diverse we are in this community. And we're glad to support this as well, because we all have a common goal here. So I've written something hopefully from a cultural aspect and from our aspect from the marae here. So in our Māori culture, our belief system encouraged respect for the environment, and it was an understanding of the connection between mankind and the world in which we live. We had atua with the deities for every part of the environment. Papa Tuanuku for the earth, Ranginui for the sky, Tāwhiri Mātea for the air and wind, Tāne Mahuta for the forests, Tangaroa for the sea and waterways, and many more. These deities ruled our lives, and because of them, we respected every part of the environment, and the environment became part of our identity. They were our guideline as to how we interacted with nature. We formulated concepts that supported our belief system. And today we still practice those concepts, such as rahui, which is a way of conservation and preservation, tapu e noa, which is about restriction and permissions, and karakia, which is to show respect to the atua before taking anything from nature. And I think that's practiced a lot with our people who do rongoa. And there'll be anyone who goes in the bush to get plants and that will do their karakia first. Anyone who's an artist, even before they do their artwork, they'll do their karakia. And so for the time that our people were here, centuries ago, till fairly recently, this way of life worked. So we'll bring it forward to 2022, where we are now in a climate crisis, which it's surprising because some industries don't seem to recognise that we're in a climate crisis. They don't seem to accept it at all. They just carry on. Even though we as the people say, we don't want this, we don't want that, they still keep going. And so what do we have now that serves as a guideline for how we interact with our environment? Well, in New Zealand, we have the Resource Management Act. And in my humble opinion, this is my opinion, and having been involved in a few cases where the RMA was used, it's a tool for city and district councils. It's a tool for private enterprise and private entrepreneurs and property developers to do what they like for a price in our area. And that's happened a few times here. We're not listened to. It does not benefit iwi, it does not benefit the community. We say we don't want pollution, and it's still approved and pushed right through because of the Resource Management Act. So from the Aorangi Marae trustees and the associated papakainga and those in Ngāti Kaupata, who are opposed, we are strongly opposed to a pyrolysis plant being built and operating in Kawakawa Road or any other area of Aotearoa. So Manawatu Wanganui takes up a large proportion of the lower half of the North Island. It is the second largest local government region. The plan to establish a pyrolysis plant at Fielding with waste from much of the North Island being transported into Fielding to be burnt and turned into fuel is not an acceptable waste management scheme. Our submission covers our reasons: pollution of our air, land and people. All three are connected so that harm to one will impact on the other two, just like dominoes, really. Toi tū te rangi, toi tū te whenua, toi tū te tangata. Toi tū te rangi is about the air we breathe. We will experience serious health problems that diminish life expectancy. In that respect, pyrolysis of waste will not be a zero waste solution. The byproduct of burn off is dioxin and carbon monoxide, which are cancer-causing chemicals and ozone-depleting emissions. COP26 has reminded us that all our planet is under threat from pollutants. Of particular concern to us is the proposed site of the plant, because our marae and papakainga are on the eastern side of the Orowa River, opposite the proposed site. A westerly wind will carry any emissions over our marae and over our homes. And we are already exposed to noxious fumes from ever-increasing volumes of traffic along Wards Road and Cameron's Line, and that was another RMA thing that we had to go through, and we just got wiped, pushed aside. The stench of the animal processing plant, which is actually in Kawakawa Road, also blows over our direction on the whimsical wind. So our aim is to secure a reduction of any emissions that might further pollute the air we breathe, while our immediate concern is for our whānau and our manuhiri who eat, sleep and drink on the marae. We are doubly concerned about the impacts on future generations who will be deprived of their rightful heritage if the air above the marae becomes a hazard rather than a comfort. Apart from emissions into the air, of which we have never encountered before, there will be charred remains of plastic and other waste, which is actually toxic to the soil, a type of slag, and contrary to some write-ups, this type of biomass is detrimental to the land, rendering it unusable over time. Toi tū te whenua is about the land that grounds our homes, our tūpuna whare, Maniahu, and our associated buildings. Land cannot be separated from the air. Our activities on our land are dependent on rainwater for drinking, cooking, cleaning, and cooling. Our land links us to the past, enables us to enjoy the present, and offers security to those who will be part of our traditions in the future. We want our tūranga waiwai to remain forever. Toi tū te whenua, that's what it means. And we want it to be free from environmental emissions that will alter the capacity and the quality of marae land. Now, in the, in the 1880s, just a little bit of history, Ngāti Kaupata whānau lost possession of the Kawakawa land block due to an unscrupulous confiscation by a bank that was approved by government. Our tupuna whare Maniahu was originally on the Kawakawa block, close to the site where the proposed pyrolysis plant is proposed. But because part of the hapu of Tahuri Wakanui had land in what is now the Taunui Āhuatiranga block, Maniahu was relocated to its present site in Aorangi. We do not want to be forced into another relocation. Moreover, in the wake of the unjust confiscation and despite questions of ownership, we have been left with the role of kaitiaki whenua, guardians for the Kawakawa land. The site itself was described by MDC, Manawatu District Council, as public land, and yet we, as members of the public, were not included in any discussion about its use when those discussions began. As kaitiaki, we do not want to see any further degradation of land that remains part of our history. Toitu Tangata is about our people. We want to live as Māori, to be healthy and well, to be our own decision makers, to be active participants in our civil communities. We cannot be well if our air is toxic, or if our land becomes a burial site for noxious waste, or if we disregard the wisdom of previous generations, or if we collude with those for whom economic gain outweighs gains for the environment and the people. Without clean air, sustainable lands, and marae wisdom, we are on a path towards poverty of spirit, bodily weakness, leadership denied, and whānau disconnection. Our worldview is one that recognises the link between people and the environment, and that's, I suppose, the modern interpretation of what I was saying before. The air, the land, our waterways, they are part of us. Potentially harmful emissions in the air, degradation of land and waterways will all impact on us at a time when we are trying to move in the opposite direction towards healthy whānau, a healthy marae, and a healthy environment. There was a half-hearted proposal that we have a technological cultural expert group to monitor the workings of the plant. But with all due diligence, we do not have this kind of expertise in pyrolysis technology to carry out this sort of oversight of a project over any period of time. We don't have the resources or the time or the financial resources. So we are not able to carry out this function so that bioplant can come here and build a pyrolysis plant. We are more interested in a solution that will provide us with positive long-term outcomes, such as job creation and employment, skills and eco-management, environmental care, and positive waste management that is non-polluting of our environment. We are not technological experts on pyrolysis incineration, but we know enough facts to know that such an incinerator in our area will compromise the air we breathe, the land that grounds us, and the health and well-being of our people now and in the future. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā no tātou katoa. Hope I haven't given you all a fright.
Kia ora, Meriti. Thank you very much. That's fantastic. Yeah, really appreciate your comments and placing that within the ambit of Te Ao Māori so people can understand how mana whenua are feeling, both about the discharge of stuff to the air, to the land, and to the water, but also to the use of the actual land itself and the history that sits behind some of that land. That's really important stuff. There's a couple of really good questions that are coming through over in the chat. I really want to encourage people to to put your questions over into the chat, to introduce yourself and to add stuff in there. If you want to reflect on what Miditi has said, if you want to reflect or ask questions about what Liam has said, please feel free to do that. And I would like now to introduce our next speaker. And I'll just find I'll find her on our great big long list of our attendees here. Let's see, where's Tricia?
I am here, but I don't know if you can find me on your screen with everybody there, Val.
Yes, what a wonderful thing! What a wonderful problem to have is that I've got
65 participants. Amazing.
There we go. I can see you now, Tricia. I would like to have the honor of introducing Associate Professor Tricia Farrelly, and I'll just light you there, Tricia. Tricia has been involved in the United Nations Environment Assembly processes that have led to the mandate for an international legally binding plastics pollution treaty. And many of you may have just heard about this very exciting news within the last couple of days. Tricia advocates for the prevention of plastic pollution in Aotearoa and the Pacific Islands. She aims to strengthen, decolonize, and democratize the science policy interface, enhance Pacific Islands representation and participation at the United Nations Environment Assembly, and support effective plastic pollution prevention policy and application. She holds multiple leadership roles promoting positive plastics-related social and environmental change, including co-founding the New Zealand Product Stewardship Council and the Aotearoa Plastic Pollutions Alliance, as well as co-director of Massey University's Political Ecology Research Center. Tricia, over to you. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you. And it's so good to have so many people here. This is terrific. I'm just going to share my screen. So if you can't see that, please, Val, let me know. Hopefully you should be seeing a screen there.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, sweet. So I'm going to be talking specifically to dioxins and specifically in relation to pyrolysis. And I want to emphasize, despite some questions around this being incineration or not, pyrolysis has been defined as incineration by the EU. I can give you the definition if you like, purely because it involves a stage of combustion, and pyrolysis is the first stage towards combustion. So I just want to clear that before I start. And so I want to talk about dioxins, and I'm not going to go through all of this. All I'm going to do is identify, for those who are a little unfamiliar, is that they're persistent pollutants, forever chemicals included in the category of POPs. They're persistent, they accumulate in the environment. They also include, unfortunately, accumulate in our bodies, which is a little bit terrifying. More than 90% of humans are exposed to dioxins through food sources, which why we're particularly concerned about these getting into our fisheries, into the marine environment, into freshwater ecosystems, terrestrial ecosystems, and of course into the air. They're highly toxic, as I'll talk about in a moment. Because they sort of build up over time, we need to really cut out the source of those. And as I've put here, we need to prevent or reduce exposure through those source-directed measures, through strict controls of industrial processes, including incineration, which is one of the major sources, by the way, globally, of dioxins, to reduce the formation of those dioxins in the environment, in our bodies. If you're familiar, endocrine disrupting chemicals are kind of my area. I'm an environmental anthropologist, but I work with toxicologists and endocrinologists to explore some of these in terms of ecotoxicology, but also in terms of our physiology as well and how it affects us. The really interesting thing about endocrine disrupting chemicals is that, dioxin is the most potent of all of them, and they work at a low dose theorem. In other words, the lower the dose, the higher the poison, rather than the other way around, which is our traditional way of measuring the risk and the safe limits for these chemicals. So low doses affect a multitude of endpoints in animals and humans. So an endocrine disrupting chemical very quickly interferes with the body's endocrine system. It produces a wide range of adverse effects. These, again, the endocrine disrupting chemicals include dioxins and dioxin-like compounds, including a wide range of chemical additives and monomer, indeed, found in plastics and polymers. The polymers that Bioplant is suggesting to feed in as feedstocks into their pyrolysis plant. PVC pipes are a classic. I'm glad to hear that Bioplant doesn't want to put those through their system. That's excellent. But they're found in these chemicals are found in plastic bottles, metal food cans in terms of the epoxy lining, flame retardants, as a kind of plastic on coatings, clothing and upholstery. And again, they're harmful at extraordinarily low doses, in fact, in parts per billion and trillion. So hearing that they won't be able to remove all the dioxins in their process, in the processing of mixed municipal waste, including plastics, is not very reassuring. In 2012, the EPA set its threshold for safe dioxin exposure as at a toxicity equivalent of 0.7 picograms per kilo of body weight. And a picogram, for those of you who don't know, is a unit of mass equivalent to 0. And then you've got 9 zeros followed by 2 more zeros and a 1 grams. So it's tiny. So endocrinologists argue that 0 picograms per kilogram of body weight per day is really the only safe threshold for any endocrine disrupting chemical. Bioplant can't remove all EDCs. They've told us that. Otherwise, but they also say that they can't remove all the dioxins. So therefore, we can safely say that they actually can't remove all of the EDCs because they can't remove all the dioxins. So this is problematic. So pyrolysis is an old technology originally used to produce biochar from untreated wood. It's only recently that municipal solid waste, including plastics, have been used in this process, and the outcome is that plastics are entirely incompatible with these technologies. As we can see from this diagram here, pyrolysis produces a range of residuals. We need to disclose those to the public, to councils, and they need to be fully addressed, the whole realm, in the consenting process, to air, to water, to soils, and to air, to water, to soils, including including what happens to human bodies. So Bioplant and their vested interests tell you that their scrubbers and filtration systems are state of the art and will remove pretty much all dioxins and produce inert solid outputs in the form of, for example, ash and char. I urge you to ask then, why is it then that Bioplant will be actively avoiding PVCs and styrenes as feedstock, and why Bioplant will not be pyrolysing tyres, as is the case with many of the GGII pyrolysis plants I regularly refer to as successful models of this technology. They did want to pyrolyse tyres and fielding too, but apparently they were told that was too toxic. So therefore, there are questions raised around these other plastics that have these dioxins and EDCs in them as well. In actuality, heavy metals and dioxins become concentrated in the resulting pyrolysis products, including the formation of non-intentionally added substances already present in the plastic feedstocks going in them. This makes them unsuitable as fuels because when combusted, when they are incinerated, these dioxins are released into the environment. The majority of dioxins are caught in these scrubbers and filters. But what happens to them at the end of useful life? What happens to the bottom ash? They haven't told us yet, but we suspect they'll probably be going to landfill if they haven't already escaped into the environment. So there are thousands of known and largely unregulated toxicants added to plastics. Antioxidants, flame retardants, there's a whole load of these. And this is why when they are pyrolysed or through other incineration technologies, they've been referred to as landfills in the sky. So I want to talk very quickly that pyrolysis is known to create toxic organic products, including toxic gases such as hydrogen cyanide and carbon monoxide, non-intentionally added substances again, nitrated PAHs, many of which are potent mutagens and carcinogens. And a 2020 study shows that there is increased risk of cancer from ingesting grains of vegetables and inhalation from the dioxins, PCBs and VOCs contaminated from emissions of gaseous streams from the pyrolysis of waste plastics. I'm going to go through the rest of it quickly because I don't want to take up too much air in the room. But when I go through these, please don't hesitate to ask me any questions. This is more about the NIASes. I'm happy to talk more about those if you wish me to. Those are the ones that are formed in the feedstocks and produced through the pyrolysis process. One thing I just want to add here too, that where you might see if there's no concerns about evident health effects as an impact of pyrolysis, please be wary of that, because many health impacts take a lot of time to show themselves, and it's difficult to measure any improved safety from modern incineration decades for years. So just a quick point, low temperatures, particularly that of pyrolysis, increase dioxin emissions. And if there's any failures in the system, this can cause fluctuations, which can also increase emissions of dioxins. I'm going to just stop there. There's probably a lot more to talk about, but happy to talk more in detail at the Q&A. Thank you. I'll just stop sharing my screen now.
Kia ora, Tricia. Thank you very much. Really appreciate that. Is an excellent presentation. I think gives people a really clear understanding of some of the real toxic issues that we've got to come to terms with in terms of this application. And again, just really highlighting that point about whether discharge to air is sufficient to address the multitude of effects here. So Medity's talked about that, Liam's talked about, and Tricia has all talked about this. Is we've talked about there's an application for horizons for discharge to air, but what about land and what about water? So yeah, really appreciate any questions coming through, and just again encourage people to put questions there. We've got one more speaker, and that is the illustrious Rick Thorpe. And Rick is going to talk a little bit about what an alternative to all of this is, because the question that we have so often is, well, and people say to us, it's better than landfill. It's better than landfill. And we say, well, actually, it isn't just a matter of comparing waste to energy and landfill. There is something else. So I just want to introduce Rick before I hand over to him. Rick Thorpe is one of the founders of Extreme Zero Waste, which is based in Whaingaroa, Raglan. He's been involved as a manager at Extreme for 22 years. And that project currently diverts over 78% of their community's total solid waste. He's a founder trustee of the Zero Waste Network and has been on our board for the last 17 years. He's held numerous other positions with Te Muri Tau, Pacific Vision, Aotearoa, and Waiuku Zero Waste. So kia ora, Rick, and thank you so much for being with us. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Ngā mihi nui kia koutou katoa. It's and massive respect and thanks to the previous speakers, all amazing. And yeah, I'm learning heaps myself. And in many ways, we're a very similar community to yourselves. We care about the future of our children, and the ability to live, similar lives that we've had. We know that resources are finite and many are running out. We know that we consume way more than we need. And we've witnessed this through, consumption, consumerism, and all of the associated waste, all of the packaging that we receive every day. And it's all happened in such a short period of time, my lifetime, 60 years walking the planet. And, I still have amazing memories shopping at the local grocer with my grandma and butcher, fish shop, and, really, and paper bags, growing food, composting, all such a common activity within the home. Waste is such a recent concept. It's such a new thing to us. It's really only been with us for a couple of generations. We're also very similar to your community in that our community was faced with making a decision about 24 years ago our landfill closed. It was a small landfill that was unlined, just drained straight into our harbour, affected our cockle beds. It, went underneath the bridge where all our kids bomb, off the bridge on a sunny afternoon. And we had to make a decision as a community, do we transport all of this waste to someone else's backyard, or do we actually take responsibility for it? And at the time, there were 3 other what were called zero waste community resource recovery centres, Ashburton, Kaikoura, Kaitaia, and they were all doing amazing work around diverting waste from landfill and turning it into social, environmental, cultural, and local economic benefits for their community. That really appealed to our community. And I'd just like to say, that none of us had a background in waste. We were just passionate about dealing with some of these issues as a community, but also as parents. We were conscious about, what opportunities we could create for our children through this. So we went through that tough community decision-making process. And in the end, Extreme Zero Waste was actually formed by our community to manage all of the solid waste within the principles of, at that time, zero waste to landfill. So that was kind of the linear approach was consume, waste, landfill. And so we wanted to build some circular systems and participate in that recovery area. At the time, Raglan, we were faced with really high unemployment and very little creative opportunities for our rangatahi. There was very little happening. We were losing all of our young ones through to Hamilton, and we wanted to take the negatives of waste and try and create positive change in our community. So, just to kind of summarize, give you a bit of a feel, but what we used to bury in the ground in Raglan, in our landfill, which only employed one person to actually manage the landfill and transport the residual waste elsewhere. What we used to bury in the ground now employs 44 people, or the equivalent of 29 full-time equivalents. We divert, yes, somewhere between 75 to 80% of our waste. And we have done for the last 15 years. We're kind of stuck at that level. And the real issues are to be able to go beyond 80% is about national policy and changes so that we, everyone is involved, I guess, in dealing with that last 20%. So employing 44 people, diverting 75, 80% of our waste stream. But we also have taken the opportunity to train and staircase all of our kids through employment, giving them the opportunity to get licenses, resource recovery, unit standards, training so that they can leave our community, with tohu in their pockets, and knowing that they'll be back again, to be on the paipai later in their life, but at least we've done something to create an opportunity for them. We also return about $1.5 million, is probably actually closer to $2 million now a year back into our local economy through wages, contracts, and spending through our local businesses. So if we can work with a local business, we will do so. That's our principle. And if we can't, if that business doesn't exist within Whaingaroa, then we will go further into the Waikato to find it. But we want all of the economic benefits to be spent locally. We have a contract with council, and we've held that contract for 22 years now. We've met 100% of our KPIs for 22 years. We've watched many of the large international companies, national companies being bought and sold multiple times. I think we're up to the 20th solid waste officer within council. You know, we've become the corporate memory really of council in terms of solid waste. You know, we're here for the long term. We'll be here intergenerationally. So, you know, and so the contract that we have with council, for every dollar that we get from the ratepayers through that contract, we not only provide the services, and I would suggest that at a very high level because we care so much, but we also return dollar for dollar back to our local community in the same financial year. We know that you know, we're not special here in Whangaroa, Raglan. You know, we were just passionate to get it started, but all of the systems which we use are very simple and can be replicated. We know that it can be done in the rural area and in the urban area. We did a joint venture with Waiuku Community, South Auckland, and we were able to help them achieve 70% waste diversion within 2 years. So we know that we can condense that period of time. We can jumpstart any community now, and they can be up and going and achieving very similar results to ourselves, you know, within a couple of years. We now hold a contract with Auckland Council, which, you know, seems bizarre. How, you know, what could Raglan offer Auckland? But they have had contracts with the large waste companies now for a couple of decades, and waste has not diminished. In fact, has increased, and so they have decided to establish 21 resource recovery centres managed by communities within the city area, and they are already seeing a massive diversion and reduction of waste as just from that change in management. So, you know, this is happening nationally, you know, through the Zero Waste Network, which is an amazing grouping of passionate people who are willing to share their experiences, willing to assist other communities become established. The Zero Waste Network now, I think there's about 130 members. Is that right, Val? About 130 members at the moment, maybe a little bit more than that. And we're really aiming towards the establishment of a national network of community resource recovery centres. And this is to prepare ourselves for product stewardship. And some people might remember the sort of 2 cents or 5 cents back on the Coke bottle, if you're as old as me. You know, that's a form of product stewardship, container deposit legislation or systems. And so those things are coming, they're in the pipeline. Within the next couple of years, we're going to have those systems back again. We need a network, a national network throughout the country so that we can receive all of those goods and all of the products that are either imported or manufactured in this country will have a full life cycle product stewardship system attached to them. So the processes and techniques, as I mentioned before, are super simple. You know, we call them hydraulics. They're not about investing millions of dollars in infrastructure. They're actually about simple systems that could be replicated anywhere within this country, and in the hope that they would actually be replicated throughout the Pacific. All of our systems don't then create another issue around energy or space availability or, as Liam talked about before, locking in sort of linear systems. All our systems are all about circular economy. So I commend, you know, your desire as a community, you know, to manage your own waste, and I guess challenge you to be part of our national network. You know, you'll receive a lot of support and experience from all of the players, including ourselves. We'd love to help you And we don't need to be part of this linear system. And look, we through our hydraulic systems, very simple, managed to get to 80%, and this is being replicated throughout the country. So let's collectively get to 80% diversion of all waste from landfill, and then collectively work on the last 20% and create a truly 100% zero waste Aotearoa. Kia ora. Thank you.
Beautiful, Rick. Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. I will just find myself here and spotlight, return my spotlight. Thank you, Rick, for that. And I guess for really sketching out a picture of what kind of alternative already exists and is already available for communities across Aotearoa, New Zealand to embrace. The Zero Waste Network is a network of community enterprises who are doing this stuff right now and who have been doing this stuff from Kaitaia all the way down to the bottom of the South Island. And building on what Rick is saying is like, we are building the new future right now with things like resource recovery, and building things like pyrolysis plants, incinerators, are just more variations of an old-fashioned linear system. We need to keep things going round and round instead of taking, making, and throwing away or burning them up. So really appreciate that, Rick. Really, really important, because we're not just saying to the community, say no. We're saying, hey, to the community, this is a different way we could do something that is about community resilience, that is about addressing climate change, that is about reducing the impact that we have on the whenua, and that is about employment opportunities for people in the community. So I just want to, I guess, open the floor at this stage for attendees and people to ask specific questions of any of the speakers. And I would just ask people really to think before you speak, because we would really like to have questions rather than statements. If you've got something that you would like, an opinion or something that you would like to put out there, please feel free to put it in the chat. Everybody can read it, but we'd like to give the opportunity if there are specific questions. If you can use the little reaction button down at the bottom, you should be able to raise your hand. And Liam and I are going to keep an eye on who's raised their hand to ask a question. So we encourage you, please, to ask your questions. So I'll just to kick us off a little bit. There have been a couple of questions in the chat. And I want to assure everybody that we're going to talk to the submission process, and we're going to talk to how people can get involved after the question time. So not to worry, we will tell everybody what it is that you need to know about making submissions and things like that. So I'll ask Bruce. Bruce has got your hand up. Bruce, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question, please?
Yeah, I was just very interested in the speakers' ideas of the most effective ways of getting this incinerator reversed. As some of you know, I was involved with an anti-incinerator project in Montreal, $400 million project by Foster Wheeler, and we defeated it. Now, I know some ways we worked. I'm curious what the speakers think are the most effective strategies. For example, I was doubtful about whether the amount of emissions to air were going to be sufficient to cause a change of decision against the incinerator. But I've heard in this discussion tonight that the very low amounts of pollution may indeed be enough to turn the decision makers away from the incinerator. So I was delighted to hear that. It's the same stuff that we were working with in the 90s, and it's still true today. But I'm curious about the best strategies. For example, media, obviously putting submissions in. We used a technique of rallying the councillors, the handful of councillors who were opposed to the incinerator. I rang up one of them and asked them, how about having a meeting? She was delighted. She said, leave it to me, we will. And they then talked to the media. Anyway, I'm talking too much about what happened then. I'm curious about what right now is the most effective tactics and strategy that will get this incinerator stopped.
Kia ora, Bruce, thank you very much. Any of our speakers want to respond to that, or Angela, who's working on the local campaign?
I don't know about a best strategy. I think our strategy is just to take one step at a time. And this current step is submissions to Horizons, which we'll talk a bit more about shortly in terms of how that, how we'll help people with that. But yeah, we're just trying to try as many different ways as we can. Yeah, that's
cool. There has been a question in the chat and somebody asked, is it possible can dioxins enter waterways through the rain? Tricia, that sounds like a question for you.
So I respond, I don't know, because there's a lot I don't know. But I suspect that they'll be washed, dioxins can be washed from place to place. They're persistent organic pollutants, right? So as is the case in marine environments, where plastic pollution experts are really familiar with the way that persistent organic pollutants adsorb onto plastics and get carried across terrestrial, marine territories, and it creates issues for invasive species and so forth, and then those are ingested also by fish. There is a possibility for that to occur too. If we've got dioxins and persistent organic pollutants floating around but they're emitting from a source such as an incinerator plant or pyrolysis plant in this case, as a form of an incineration technology, then that is likely to happen. Whether it actually gets up into the rain, there has been some suggestions about that, but that is not something I'm particularly familiar with. Hopefully that's enough to go by at the moment.
Thanks, Tricia. Are there some other questions?
Can I just say, I had the job of jotting down questions as they came up, but I've noticed that Tricia has done a really good job of answering them as they actually went up. So I'm not sure how useful it is to read them out, but I wonder, Tricia, are there any that you want to highlight? Because quite a lot of the questions I noticed are the sorts of questions that people often ask us. So Tricia, is there anything that you've replied to that you think might be worth speaking that everyone can hear?
I don't know. If I could just say quickly, because I can see Sam's hand up, and I don't know if Bruce's hand is residual from before, if he's got another question. So very, very quickly, what I would just add that I didn't quite have an opportunity to say during the presentation that may spark some more questions is that if Biopart aims to pyrolyse only unrecyclable plastics, which we heard in the presentation yesterday, and yet most of the toxic plastics are unrecyclable because they're toxic. They can't pyrolyse PVC and styrenes because they're too toxic. They can't pyrolyse PET and PVC because they create inadvertent acid production, which is a real nightmare for pyrolysis. They shouldn't pyrolyse mixed resins and recycle plastics because they have these persistent organic pollutants in them and non-intentionally added substances. So my question is, so what will constitute the plastics feedstock that they're claiming to fulfill the 5 tonnes per day of mixed solid waste to keep going? And I suspect that will therefore require, particularly as we're reducing, we're reusing, we're increasing recycling with all of the with our national plastics plan, which we're going to increase, improve on, and our waste legislation and all the good things that we now need to do because we have to respond to the resolution that's before us around the plastic pollution treaty. So what are we planning here? We're going to import from elsewhere? Are we going to import from the Pacific Islands, which is something I've heard? Are we going to import from different countries? Where is that going to come from? Does anybody know? That's my question to the group. And if there's any other questions that fall out from that, that may be useful as well.
Cool. Thank you. Thanks, Tricia. I just have a look and see if there are other. Yeah, Sam, you've got a question.
Hi, just quickly. So Tricia, from your presentation, I don't know if you said it, but I just missed it. So can we say with 100% certainty that there will be dioxins released into the air in Fielding as a result of this? Can we be?
Oh, absolutely. And even Bioplant admitted last night. They said they can't remove all the dioxins, and we know this because there is no incineration technology, no pyrolysis, no arc plasma, no gasification, nothing can operate at zero dioxin emissions. It's utterly impossible. So no.
So then, I mean, you look at the response that people have to the vaccine, and I don't want to get into that, but in terms of the potential health effects, and that is such an extreme response. And now we have something that is not a potential; it's a definite. It's going to affect our children. It's going to affect reproduction cycles. I just think we got to get that scare stuff out there. I'm a mom. I know moms. That will get their attention.
I just wanted to respond as well, Sam, and to say in the chat said that Horizons Regional Council commissioned a report on Bioplant's resource application. And that report was carried out by an engineering firm in Christchurch called PDP. And I've put a link that's in the chat that people can have a look at that report. And what's interesting is that in the Bioplant actual application, the resource consent application, there is not a mention of dioxins, but in the technical report, the engineering firm that reviewed the application does talk about the dioxin contamination that will be coming out. So that we have from the council itself, from the council's own sort of engineering assessment at this stage. So yeah, I think we can be fairly well assured that indeed there are dioxins, as well as what Tricia said, the company's admission last night. So I just want to turn over, I think, Brent Barrett, you've got a question?
Yeah, thanks. It might be seen as theoretical, but I'd be really interested in the comments from speakers tonight. If the feedstock were limited to green waste, how would that change your perspective on the proposal?
Yeah, happy to have a go answering that, Brent. It would change the nature of this proposal substantially. However, it would raise a whole further set of questions as to, if we're going to do something with organic waste, is pyrolysis a better solution than composting, than anaerobic digestion, than there's a whole range of technologies we can do if we're just talking about green waste and organic waste, and that's a whole different conversation. It also means we're not dealing with a lot of the issues around the chemical contaminants around that are in the plastics and in the municipal solid waste. So yeah, it's a whole different ballgame, I think, but does raise a series of other questions.
Is there any of the other speakers want to speak to that? Yeah.
Yeah, Val, I'll just say very briefly, there has been proposed pyrolysis plants for wood waste, and there's been concerns around toxicants associated with chemicals in the wood, treated wood, for example. So if you are going to feed any kind of technology like this with organic waste, you'd have to be very careful about what that waste had been treated with before. And as Liam and Hannah is really familiar with, even our municipal composting is often really quite significantly highly contaminated with plastic waste. So I'll leave Liam to talk to that if he feels he wants to as well.
Cool. Thanks, Tricia. Angela, have you got a question that you wanted to? Yep.
I just wanted to repeat a question that's in chat because it's really pertinent to our area, and that is around what can we do with silage wrap and agricultural plastic wraps. And I noticed that Rick put a brief answer. I was wondering if you'd be willing to say a little bit more.
Yeah, so there is existing markets for silage wrap, and so it can actually be, it's still a bit of a problem in that it's a linear system. I mean, the ideal system would be silage wrap turned back into silage wrap again, and there's that technology is certainly coming. The carbon chains of plastics, the technology is changing, so as they get shorter, they get more brittle, but realigning the carbon chain so that the plastics can be actually reused multiple times. But we really need to have those processing plants within Aotearoa because there's such a high organic contaminants with the silage wrap that it creates a problem if we're going to ship them offshore. So yeah, we need to expand the infrastructure, and from what we've got today, Astron Plastics accept silage wraps and turn them into all sorts of other things, but that's a linear approach, and like I say, silage wrap back to silage wrap would be ideal.
Thanks, Rick. Liam, I don't know if you want to speak to farm plastics more generally as part of regulated product stewardship stuff. If you or Tricia want to mention that ongoing work.
Yeah, maybe Tricia's better placed to talk about that. But basically, they have been all farm plastics have been declared as a priority product by the government, which means that a product stewardship scheme for those for all kinds of farm plastics and also agricultural chemicals and their containers need to be designed. And ideally, that scheme would look at, not just how we deal with it at end of life, but also potentially how we can put in place measures for the design of how those products flow through the economy, so that maybe the containers themselves are redesigned to be recycled in a closed loop, and there are fees and things that go towards the collection, so that it's not up to ratepayers and councils to fund the cleanup of those materials. The costs are internalized, but maybe Tricia has more to add.
Oh, well, that's perfect, Liam. I think the only thing I can really add to that is also return schemes, sort of refillables, return and refilling where safe, and of course there's going to be safety standards around that as well. And I'm just thinking about the silage wraps. This may not be the perfect case for this, but reusable wraps. I mean, I'd love to see some innovations out there for reusable wraps, large wraps, as they are for things like the big crates of produce in supermarkets, which hasn't been taken up yet. And I know that there's a number of innovators out there who've created these incredible systems for reusable wraps, where they actually take those back again at the end of their useful life and reuse and rework them into another one. So something like that is, I guess, what Liam's talking about too, not just redesigning the delivery systems, the whole system in itself, the return systems and so forth, but also redesigning the product itself so you can get so much more life out of it rather than just using it once and then having to recycle it again.
Thank you, Tricia. We'll just take a couple more minutes for a couple more questions. So Sue, did you have something? Can you unmute yourself, Sue? Thanks.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Sorry. Look, I haven't been in waste minimisation for 6 years, so I'm really out of touch. But so this is a dumb question, but one of the speakers will know the answer. So when I did some university research about the wicked problem of used agrochemical containers, which there are a lot of in a community like ours, the conclusion was to promote dedicated medium volume refillables. So I mean, like Sorry, that's my phone. Sorry. So has anyone, like, I know that 3M crowd years ago started a collection, but it was really just collection to recycle plastic containers, plastic and metal agrochemical containers. But does anybody know if anyone, other than the big IBCs, the cubic metre IBCs for Roundup for the forestry industry, is there any use of IBCs? Because whenever I interviewed every one of the 20 registered agrochemical companies in New Zealand at the time in 1996. They all said, oh no, New Zealand's such a small market. But the thing is, they all were owned by these big multinational parent people who were doing refillables overseas, but not in New Zealand. So has it happened in New Zealand? Does anybody know? So dedicated, like it'd have to be dedicated, like, the same chemical would have to be reused in, metal refillables.
Does anybody want to tackle that question specifically? Sue, I've just put a link in the chat. Ag Recovery is actually, they have been charged with designing the product stewardship scheme around agricultural plastics. So that link in the chat there will take you to some greater information about what they're doing. They're saying all agricultural chemicals and their containers up to and including 1,000 liters in size that are used for all sorts of different activities are going to be within the scheme, this product stewardship scheme.
But is that just a repeat of like what Resina are doing to recycle to melt down the containers and make them into buckets or something like that, or wheel stops for parking places or something like that, which is downcycling, not upcycling, and it's not prevent, reduce, reuse, which is cleaner production,
Yeah, it's a very good question. They're saying that large drums and IBCs are returned for reuse. But I'm not sure about things that are smaller than that.
Right. So just Roundup probably. It's just glyphosate, is it?
Yeah. Any of our speakers want to tackle that one?
I'm just reading Hannah's chat. There's been some discussion about reuse in the context of the scheme, so that's exciting to hear. And I think also just another note too, for those who are a bit sort of negative or cynical about this, rather than saying it's too hard or it can't be done, a lot of these things that we say we can't do in Aotearoa New Zealand, they are already doing elsewhere. So I think we just need to also take note of what's going on elsewhere and adapting that as appropriate to the Aotearoa New Zealand context. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
That's a great question, Sue. Thank you very much. Yeah, really appreciate that. That is one of the great challenges for us and moving towards more sustainable systems. Yeah. I think we will close off with the questions because we've got only a couple of minutes left. What I would say is we are all here and happy to take further questions from people. If anybody wants to send questions through to the Fielding Against Incineration group, you can obviously join the Facebook page, but you can also send questions to me at the Zero Waste Network, and I can farm them out to our speakers. And my email address is just kiora@zerowaste.co.nz. So what I would like to do is just to turn over to Angela for a couple more minutes and ask her to talk through a little bit of what's going to happen next with Fielding Against Incineration and what's happening with the submission process. Can I get you to unmute yourself, Angela?
Kia ora, and thanks, Val, and thanks everybody for hanging in there for a really interesting and informative talk. Lots of detail in there, so I'm really pleased it's being recorded, and we'll send out a follow-up email to people who registered with follow-up details, what we're doing next, link to recording, those sorts of things. So as I've said before, the first thing that we're really emphasising is for people to get those submissions in before the 31st of March. And the next activity we've got planned is we're going to have an online submission party or party or workshop, party/workshop. We'll produce some resources of things that we think are important points for those who oppose the scheme that they might want to use in their submissions. We'll help people on that night. It'll be the Thursday, the 24th of March, 7 p.m. on Zoom, and we'll help you to put the submissions. It's more fun, more enjoyable, I think, to do these things together than to try and beaver away at home. So that's a really important one. We're really keen to have more people to express any interest you might have in zero waste alternatives. So not just putting your energy into opposing this plant, but also letting council know that there is a real strong interest in positive alternatives. So if you're interested in that, if you could let me know, my contact details will be in the follow-up email. What else? And as a number of you are probably already aware, as of April, council's putting out their revised waste minimisation and management strategy for submissions. So it's important that we're in that process. And whether they realise it or not, council needs us. Any ideas are like, along with the pyrolysis proposal, they've also been saying that they're really keen to get into minimisation, and they need community behind them for that. They won't be able to do minimisation. They need community to be involved and help them with that. So I'm looking forward to a fruitful partnership or relationship, maybe not partnership, but relationship with them as we go forward with that. We're a really little committee, so if any of you have got an interest in being more actively involved, we'd love to hear from you. Or if you don't like committees, if you've got particular skills that you think might be helpful to us, then do let us know. If you haven't signed our petition yet, please do so on Action Station. We'll put the details in the follow-up. And as Val said, our Facebook page, Fielding Against Incineration, is our main way of communicating to people about this issue. And picking up from what Bruce has said in chat, if it comes to it, yes, we will definitely be mobilising. Bit challenging because of COVID at the moment. We've so far stuck to Zoom type things mostly. But if it comes to that, we will be, or at least, yeah, some of us will be. So, and hopefully you would all support us with that. I think that's about me. Val, if you think there's anything I've missed, if you could fill it in, that would be great. Thank you.
Kia ora. Thank you so much, Angela. I just really want to take the opportunity to thank our speakers, Liam Prince, Meriti Taipana, Associate Professor Tricia Farrelly, and Rick Thorpe from Extreme Zero Waste. Thank you all so much for your time, and to thank everybody on the call for being here with us to become informed and educated about exactly what's going on. We really do welcome more questions, more discussion. So as Angela said, join up with the Facebook page. You'll get an email following up about details from tonight, and to please make your voice heard about this process. So 31st of March is the big date for submission. So we really encourage people, doesn't matter if it's long or short, but please make your voice heard. It's important that we exercise our rights in the democratic system to have our say. So I would just like to ask, please, if Meriti, if you could please close us with a karakia, and thank you again, everybody, for this evening.
Tēnā koutou katoa, kei ingo I tātou. He honore, he kororia ki te atua, he maungarongo ki te whenua, he whakaaro pai ki ngā tangata katoa, hanga te atua, he nā kauhau, ki roki tēnā ki tēnā o mātou. Āmene.
Amine. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Val, thank you.
Thanks, Val. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Merete.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Val and Merete.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Kia koutou.